Imagine you're standing on a beach in Nassau, sometime around 1715. The sand is white, the water is that impossible shade of Caribbean blue, and cutting across the horizon, moving so fast it barely seems real, is a single-masted vessel with a low profile and a hull built for one thing and one thing only: speed. Now zoom out. Picture the entire Caribbean basin from above, a cinematic sweep across thousands of miles of open water. Jamaica sits to the west, Hispaniola in the center. The string of Lesser Antilles curves down like a broken spine toward the coast of South America. And scattered across every channel, every strait, every shallow inlet between those islands, dozens of these sleek little ships are hunting. Pull the map wider, follow the trade routes. Spanish treasure fleets crawl northwest from Cartagena and Portobelo, loaded with silver and gold. English merchant convoys push south from the American colonies, carrying rum, sugar, tobacco. French traders hug the coast of Saint-Domingue. Dutch vessels slide through the corridors near Curaçao and Bonaire. Every single one of those fat, heavy cargo ships had the same nightmare. Not a warship, not a frigate bristling with cannons. Their nightmare was a tiny, fast, almost invisible vessel that could appear out of nowhere, close the distance before anyone could react, and vanish into shallow waters where no pursuer could follow. That vessel was the sloop. And it didn't just participate in the Golden Age of Piracy, it defined it. More pirates sailed sloops than any other type of ship. More prizes were taken by sloops than by any vessel twice their size. And more legends were built on the decks of sloops than on any towering man of war in any navy on Earth. This is the story of the ship that made piracy possible. Before we talk about why pirates loved the sloop, we need to understand what a sloop actually was, because the word gets thrown around a lot, and if you're picturing something from a Hollywood movie, you're probably imagining it wrong. A sloop in the early 1700s was a single-masted sailing vessel, typically between 35 and 65 feet in length. She carried one large mainsail, a foresail, and often a jib or two extending forward from the bowsprit. Some carried topsails for extra speed in favorable winds. The hull was narrow and shallow, drawing as little as 4 to 5 feet of water. And she was fast. Depending on conditions, a well-built sloop could hit 10 to 12 knots. In an era where most merchant ships topped out at 6 or 7, that was borderline absurd. But speed was only part of the equation. What made the sloop truly special was her versatility. She could sail closer to the wind than almost any other vessel of her time. She could navigate shallow coastal waters, river mouths, and reef-lined passages that would rip the hull off a larger ship. She required a relatively small crew, sometimes as few as 15 to 20 men, which meant less food, less water, and fewer mouths to feed during long stretches between prizes. And here's the detail that really mattered. She was everywhere. Sloops weren't exotic warships or purpose-built pirate vessels. They were the pickup trucks of the colonial Caribbean. Fishermen used them, traders used them, smugglers used them, plantation owners used them to move goods between islands. They were common, affordable, easy to maintain, and available in practically every port from Bermuda to Barbados, which meant that when a young man with nothing to lose decided he wanted to try his hand at piracy, he didn't need to steal a frigate or capture a galleon. He just needed a sloop. And there was always one sitting in some poorly guarded harbor waiting to be taken. To understand why the sloop became the pirate's weapon of choice, you have to understand the geography of where piracy actually happened. And this is where the popular image of piracy falls apart. Hollywood gives us this image of pirates roaming the open ocean, chasing ships across thousands of miles of empty sea. That happened sometimes, sure, but the vast majority of piracy in the Golden Age took place in coastal waters, around islands, and in the narrow channels and straits that connected major trade routes. Think about the Bahamas. Over 700 islands and cays, most of them uninhabited, surrounded by shallow reefs and sandbars. A large warship trying to chase a pirate through the Bahamas was like a truck trying to chase a motorcycle through a forest. The truck might be more powerful, but it's going to get stuck on the first narrow path. Now think about the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the entire Caribbean. Every Spanish treasure fleet heading home to Seville had to pass through here. A pirate in a sloop could tuck into a cove on the Haitian coast, wait for a merchant ship to pass, sprint out, close the distance in under an hour, take the prize, and disappear back into the maze of coastline before any escort ship could react. Or consider the Carolina coast. The Outer Banks of North Carolina were a pirate highway in the early 1700s. Shallow sounds, barrier islands, shifting sandbars. Blackbeard himself operated here specifically because his sloops could navigate waters that Royal Navy vessels couldn't enter without running aground. The sloop wasn't just a fast ship. It was a ship perfectly matched to the battlefield where piracy actually happened, and that match between vessel and environment is what made the Golden Age of Piracy possible in the first place. Now let's talk about how pirates actually used these things in combat, because this is where the sloop really earned its reputation. The typical pirate attack in a sloop followed a pattern that was devastatingly effective. First, identification. A pirate crew would spot a potential prize on the horizon. The captain or lookout would study the ship through a spyglass, trying to determine her nationality, her cargo, and most importantly, her armament. Was she a lightly armed merchant, a well-defended convoy escort, a naval patrol vessel? If the target looked promising, the sloop would close the distance. And this is where speed changed everything. A merchant captain spotting a suspicious vessel on the horizon might have 30 minutes or an hour to prepare if the approaching ship was another merchantman or a slow brigantine. Against a sloop running at 10 or 11 knots with the wind behind her, that window shrank to minutes. As the sloop closed in, the pirate crew would raise their colors. And this is an important detail that often gets overlooked. Pirates didn't always fly the Jolly Roger from the start. Many sloops flew false flags, pretending to be merchants or even naval vessels, until they were close enough that running was no longer an option. Then the black flag went up, or the red one, which was actually worse. A red flag meant no quarter. Surrender now, or everyone dies. And here's the thing. Most of the time, it worked. The merchant crew would see a fast sloop bearing down on them, see the pirate colors, do the math in their heads, and surrender without a fight. Why risk your life for someone else's cargo? Merchant sailors were paid poorly and treated worse. Most of them had zero loyalty to the ship's owner or the cargo. When a pirate captain offered them the choice between peaceful surrender and a fight, they were almost certain to lose. The decision was obvious. When combat did happen, the sloop had another advantage. Her low profile made her a difficult target for cannon fire. A merchant ship's guns were positioned to fire at targets roughly their own height on the water. A sloop sitting low with a shallow draft was literally below the angle most guns could depress to. Cannonballs would sail over the sloop's deck while her crew prepared to board. And boarding was where pirates and sloops excelled. The small crew size that might seem like a disadvantage was actually a feature. Every man on a pirate sloop was a fighter. There were no passengers, no non-combatants, no dead weight. When they swarmed over the rails of a merchant ship, they were outnumbered on paper, but outmatched the defenders in aggression, skill, and sheer desperation. These were men with nothing to lose, and they fought like it. You can't talk about the sloop in the Golden Age of Piracy without talking about the men and women who made these ships famous. So let's start with the most notorious of them all. Benjamin Hornigold was one of the founding fathers of the Pirate Republic in Nassau, and his preferred vessel was the sloop. Before he became famous as Blackbeard's mentor, Hornigold was already terrorizing the Caribbean from the deck of a fast sloop, taking merchant vessels with surgical precision. He reportedly refused to attack English ships, which annoyed his crew to no end, but his skill as a sloop captain was never in question. He understood better than almost anyone how to use the vessel's speed and maneuverability to control an engagement. He chose when to fight, where to fight, and when to disappear. And he taught those same skills to the man who would become the most feared pirate in history. Edward Teach, Blackbeard. The name alone still carries weight 3 centuries later. And while Blackbeard is most associated with the Queen Anne's Revenge, a captured French slave ship that he converted into a 40-gun warship, the reality is that Teach spent the majority of his pirate career commanding sloops. His first independent command was a sloop. When the Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground at Beaufort Inlet in 1718, possibly on purpose, Teach transferred his operations to a smaller sloop called the Adventure. And it was aboard the Adventure that Blackbeard met his end. On November 22, 1718, Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy cornered Teach in Ocracoke Inlet off the coast of North Carolina. Maynard was commanding two sloops of his own, the Jane and the Ranger. The final battle was sloop against sloop, Teach's Adventure against Maynard's Jane in the shallow waters of Pamlico Sound. The fight was brutal, close quarters, and bloody. Teach reportedly took 5 gunshot wounds and 20 sword cuts before he finally went down. But the point is this: the most famous pirate battle in history wasn't fought between towering warships with broadsides of 50 cannons. It was fought between sloops, small, fast, lethal sloops in shallow water where no larger vessel could operate. Then there was Charles Vane, one of the most aggressive pirates of the era. Vane was a sloop captain through and through. He operated out of Nassau, refused the king's pardon when Governor Woodes Rogers arrived in 1718, and reportedly sailed his burning sloop straight past the governor's ships as a middle finger on his way out of the harbor. Vane understood the sloop's greatest tactical advantage, the ability to disengage. If a fight wasn't going his way, Vane could simply run. And in a sloop, very few ships could catch him. This willingness to run when the odds turned sour was actually a core part of pirate strategy, and the sloop made it possible. Pirates weren't soldiers. They had no nation to defend, no honor code that demanded they fight to the death. They were businessmen of violence, and a dead pirate earns no prizes. The sloop gave them the option to fight when the odds were good and vanish when they weren't. And we can't talk about sloops without mentioning Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two of the most famous pirates in history, who served together aboard the sloop commanded by Calico Jack Rackham. Rackham's sloop was small, even by sloop standards. His crew was relatively tiny. But Bonny and Red became legends precisely because of how effectively they fought in the close-quarters environment that sloop warfare demanded. When Rackham's crew was captured in October 1720, witnesses at the trial testified that Bonny and Red were among the last standing, fighting on deck while the rest of the crew hid below. Their ferocity in battle was amplified by the sloop's intimate scale. There was nowhere to hide. You either fought or you died. Samuel Bellamy, known as Black Sam, captained several vessels during his short but spectacular pirate career, but he started with a sloop. Bellamy was unusual among pirates in that he actively sought to upgrade to larger ships, eventually capturing the Whydah, a former slave ship that he turned into a 28-gun pirate warship. But even Bellamy kept sloops in his fleet as tenders and scouts. He understood that the sloop was the eyes and ears of any pirate operation. A large ship might carry the heavy guns, but the sloops were what found the prizes, chased down the runners, and navigated the coastal waters where the real money moved. Let's compare the sloop to the other ships that sailed during the Golden Age to really understand why it dominated. The brigantine was probably the sloop's closest competitor. 2 masts instead of 1, a bit more canvas, slightly more cargo space. Some pirates preferred brigantines because they could carry more guns and more crew. But the extra mast meant more complexity in rigging, more crew needed to handle the sails, and slightly less ability to point into the wind. A brigantine was a solid choice for a pirate who'd outgrown a sloop, but she couldn't match the sloop's ability to vanish into shallow water. The schooner was another option that gained popularity later in the pirate era. 2-masted like the brigantine, but rigged fore and aft instead of square-rigged. Schooners were fast, nimble, and could sail close to the wind. They eventually replaced sloops as the preferred vessel for smugglers and privateers in the later 1700s. But during the Golden Age proper, roughly 1690 to 1730, the schooner was still evolving and hadn't yet reached the refinement that would make it dominant. The frigate was the warship that pirates feared. Fast for her size, heavily armed, and crewed by trained naval sailors. A frigate could outgun any pirate vessel afloat, but she couldn't follow a sloop into shallow water. She couldn't navigate the reef-lined passages of the Bahamas. She couldn't chase a pirate up a river or into a narrow inlet. The frigate was a highway patrol car, terrifying on the open road, useless in the back alleys. And then there was the galleon, the Spanish treasure galleon, the ultimate prize. Massive, heavily laden with gold and silver, escorted by warships. Taking a galleon was the pirate equivalent of winning the lottery. It happened rarely, and when it did, it was almost never a sloop that did it alone. But sloops played a critical role even in galleon captures. They served as scouts identifying the treasure fleet and its escorts. They harassed the escort ships, drawing them out of formation. And once a galleon was isolated and boarded, sloops could ferry the plunder away quickly while the larger pirate ships held the prize. The point is that no single ship type could do everything. But if you could only have one, you wanted a sloop. She might not carry as many guns as a brigantine. She might not hold as much crew as a frigate. She definitely couldn't match a galleon for cargo space, but she could go where none of them could. She could escape from all of them, and she could catch anything smaller, which happened to include most of the merchant traffic in the Caribbean. Now let's talk about something that rarely gets covered: how pirates maintained and modified their sloops. Because a sloop fresh off the builder's blocks and a sloop that had been in pirate service for 6 months were two very different vessels. The first thing most pirates did after acquiring a sloop was careen her. Careening meant beaching the ship at high tide, waiting for the water to recede, and then scraping the hull clean of barnacles, seaweed, and marine growth. This sounds mundane, but it was absolutely critical. A fouled hull could cut a ship's speed by 30% or more. For a vessel whose entire tactical advantage was speed, that was the difference between catching a prize and watching it sail away. Pirates careened their ships frequently, far more often than legitimate naval vessels. They had to. The warm Caribbean waters promoted rapid marine growth, and every week without careening meant a slower ship. This is one reason why pirates favored remote islands and hidden coves. They needed regular access to beaches where they could pull their ships out of the water without being disturbed. After careening, pirates often modified the sloop's armament. A typical commercial sloop might carry 4 to 6 small cannons, maybe 4-pounders or 6-pounders, just enough to discourage casual attackers. Pirates would add more guns, sometimes doubling or tripling the original armament. They'd cut additional gun ports into the hull, mount swivel guns on the rails, and stockpile small arms like muskets, pistols, and blunderbusses for boarding actions. But there was a limit to how many guns you could add. Every cannon added weight, weight reduced speed. Speed was the whole point. So pirate captains had to make a calculation. How many guns do I need to intimidate a merchant into surrendering without making my ship too slow to catch one? The sweet spot for most pirate sloops was somewhere around 8 to 12 cannons, enough firepower to look threatening, but not so much that it turned the sloop into a floating gun platform that couldn't outrun a rowboat. Some pirates also modified the sloop's rigging, adding a topsail, adjusting the boom length, changing the cut of the mainsail. These modifications were specific to the captain's preferences and the waters they planned to operate in. A pirate working the open passages between major islands might prioritize downwind speed. One working the shallow, winding channels of the Bahamas might optimize for maneuverability and the ability to tack quickly. The sloop was, in modern terms, a platform, and pirates were constantly tweaking that platform to match their operating environment. There's another aspect of sloop warfare that deserves attention, and that's the psychological dimension. Because pirates understood something that modern military strategists write entire textbooks about. The perception of threat is often more powerful than the threat itself. A sloop bearing down on a merchant ship with a black flag flying was terrifying not because of the 12 cannons on her deck. It was terrifying because of what those cannons represented. The crew behind them had nothing to lose. They operated outside the law. They had no rules of engagement, no officers to answer to, no courts-martial to worry about. If they boarded your ship and you'd resisted, you might be killed, tortured, or marooned on a deserted island. If you surrendered peacefully, you'd probably be robbed, but left alive. Pirates cultivated this reputation deliberately, And the sloop was central to the performance. The speed of approach, the sudden appearance of colors, the impossibility of escape. It was theater. Violent, dangerous theater, but theater nonetheless. And the sloop was the stage. Consider the timing. A merchant captain spots a sail on the horizon. If it's a large ship, he has time. He can adjust course, signal for help, prepare defenses. But if it's a sloop, the math changes immediately. That sail is closing fast. There's no time to run. There's barely time to load the guns. And by the time the black flag goes up, the sloop is close enough that you can see the faces of the men on deck, and those faces are not friendly. The sheer speed of the encounter, enabled entirely by the sloop, compressed the decision-making window for merchant captains to almost nothing. And when humans are forced to make life or death decisions with almost no time to think, they almost always choose the option that keeps them alive. Which meant surrender, which meant the pirates won without firing a shot. This happened far more often than popular culture suggests. The majority of pirate attacks during the Golden Age ended without significant bloodshed. Not because pirates were gentle, but because the sloop made resistance seem pointless. Why fight a battle you can't win against people who'll kill you if you try? The beginning of the end for the sloop's dominance in piracy came from an unlikely direction. Not bigger guns, not faster ships. Government policy. When Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau in 1718 as the first royal governor of the Bahamas, he brought with him the king's pardon. Any pirate who surrendered and swore to abandon piracy would be forgiven for all past crimes. And he backed up the carrot with a very large stick. Rogers brought warships with him. Not the ponderous frigates that pirates had been evading for years, but smaller, faster vessels specifically designed to operate in the same coastal waters where sloops thrived. This was the key strategic shift. The colonial powers finally figured out that you can't catch a sloop with a frigate. You catch a sloop with another sloop, or with a purpose-built patrol vessel that could match the pirate's speed and navigate the same shallow waters. The Royal Navy began commissioning and deploying sloops of war, small, fast naval vessels crewed by professional sailors and armed with enough firepower to overpower any pirate. These weren't improvised pirate sloops with extra cannons bolted on. They were purpose-built warships designed from the keel up to hunt pirates in their own territory. At the same time, colonial governors began offering bounties for captured pirates. Pirate hunters, many of them former pirates themselves, put to sea in their own sloops, hunting their former comrades for reward money. The very vessel that had given pirates their advantage was now being turned against them. The geography that had protected pirates also began to work against them. As colonial authorities mapped and charted the shallow waters, hidden coves, and reef passages that pirates used as highways and hideouts, those sanctuaries became traps. A pirate sloop tucked into a familiar cove might find a naval sloop waiting at the exit. Benjamin Hornigold, who had been one of Nassau's most successful pirates, accepted the king's pardon and became a pirate hunter himself. He knew the waters, the tactics, and the hiding places better than any naval officer could, and he pursued his former colleagues with the same skill he'd used as a pirate. Hornigold hunting pirates in a sloop was the ultimate irony of the era. By 1720, the back of Caribbean piracy was largely broken, not because the pirates' ships were inadequate. The sloop was as effective as ever. But the strategic environment had changed. When colonial powers deployed the same type of vessel with better training, better supply lines, and the full weight of governmental authority behind them, the pirates' advantage evaporated. Charles Vane was captured in 1720, tried, and hanged. Calico Jack Rackham was taken that same year. Blackbeard had been killed in 1718. Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate of the era by tonnage captured, was killed in 1722 aboard the Royal Fortune, and while Roberts preferred larger vessels, he always kept sloops in his squadron. His death effectively ended the Golden Age. The sloop didn't disappear with the pirates. Far from it. She continued to evolve as a vessel type, eventually spawning the Baltimore Clipper, the Bermuda sloop, and other designs that remained competitive for over a century. The basic principles that made the sloop great, speed, shallow draft, ease of handling, remained valuable long after the last pirate flag was hauled down. What's remarkable about the sloop isn't just what it did during the Golden Age. It's what it tells us about how piracy actually worked. Forget the romantic images of massive pirate ships with 40 cannons and crews of hundreds. The reality was smaller, faster, and far more clever. The Golden Age of Piracy was not a war of brute force. It was a war of speed, information, and positioning. Pirates succeeded because they understood their environment better than anyone else. They knew the tides, they knew the channels. They knew which reefs to avoid and which ones to use as barriers against pursuit. And the sloop was the tool that let them exploit every one of those advantages. In many ways, the sloop represents one of the most successful matchings of technology to strategy in maritime history. The vessel perfectly fit the operational environment. The pirates perfectly fit the vessel. And the result was a period of roughly 40 years where a few thousand men in small, fast ships brought the commerce of the Spanish, English, and French empires to its knees. There's something almost elegant about it. The Spanish and English and French poured millions into building massive warships, fortifying harbors, and deploying naval squadrons. And a bunch of outcasts, deserters, and escaped servants in cheap sloops made fools of them for decades. The sloop made piracy democratic. You didn't need a king's commission or a wealthy patron to become a pirate. You needed a sloop, a willing crew, and enough nerve to raise a black flag. That accessibility is what made the Golden Age possible. Not treasure maps or buried gold or any of the myths that Hollywood invented. Just a small, fast ship and the willingness to use it. And maybe that's the real legacy of the sloop. Not the battles it fought or the treasure it carried, but the idea it represented. That speed and cunning could overcome size and power. That knowing your terrain mattered more than the number of guns on your deck, that the smallest ship in the harbor could be the most dangerous one on the water. The next time you see an image of a pirate ship, chances are you're looking at some towering galleon with a skull and crossbones flying from the mainmast. That makes for a great poster. But it's a lie. The real pirate ship was smaller, faster, lower to the water. She didn't announce herself with rows of cannon ports and billowing sails. She appeared out of nowhere, closed the distance before you could react, took what she wanted, and vanished into shallow water where you couldn't follow. She was a sloop, and she was the most effective weapon the Golden Age of Piracy ever produced. If you want to see how Blackbeard turned a captured slave ship into the most feared warship in the Caribbean, that video is on screen now. Subscribe for more stories from the Golden Age.